Alright, well, let's start talking about tying in the tail. Now, before we actually tie in the tail, we do need to have a little bit of a tutorial about the cape. What are we talking about here? Well, we are talking about these guys right here. These are the capes, and yeah, it's simply just a chicken. So as you can see, we have a variety of different colors, and if you were to pick these four colors, so here we have this gray color, and that's called dun, brown, this barred black and white is called grizzly, and this over here is either called cream or ginger. If you were to get capes in these colors right here, you would be able to tie dozens and dozens of different dry flies just with these colors alone, these color combinations. So let's talk about the cape itself and handling it. So up here you've got where the head used to be. And then down here you've got where the neck comes down and goes down into the thorax of the bird. Whenever I grab a cape, I always grab it like this. If you grab the cape like this, all you're going to see is just a sea of feathers. It's not going to have a whole lot of meaning to you. You grab it like this, and now as you pull back, the cape reveals itself to you. Down here, you've got your size 24s. You come up a little bit and you can see the size 22s. Up even further, as you can see, I've been tying a lot of size 18s and they're getting a little bit small. And as we work our way down the cape, you can see that the feathers get bigger and bigger. And that way you can properly choose, when we get to tying in the hackle, which of these feathers to pick from. The other part that you want to know about, and this is really important when it comes to tying in the tail, are these feathers out here on both sides. The feathers in the middle are a little bit more pliable, they're softer, but you'll notice that when you get out here to the sides of the bird, that these feathers out here are much stiffer, and that when you look at the actual fibers themselves, they're much spikier. It's these feathers that we're going to pick to tie in the tail with. You'll notice that because of the stiffness, you're not going to need as many fibers. You can cut down on the amount of material that you're using on the mayfly. And I always believe in not overdressing dry flies. And it'll give it some buoyancy too. It'll be able to keep that fly sitting right on top of the surface of the water. What happened is that the chicken here, this will come around, and then that these fibers are actually called guard feathers, and that these feathers come around, and what they are designed to do is to protect the bird in case it gets attacked by another chicken. So as the claws of the other chicken come in here, it's these fibers right here that are super tough that are protecting the vital organs of the neck, and it's these feathers that we use to tie in the tail. Alright, let's have a little bit more discussion about feathers here before we get into actually tying a tail on. Now, one of the things that you're going to need to do is to take a look at the feather itself. And we're going to be looking at webbing here. Now you'll notice this kind of dark line that goes right down next to the stem of the feather. That's all webbing in there. Now webbing is not really what you want to use when it comes to either hackle or the tail. It's the real webby part of the feather, and it doesn't make for good dry flies. And you can see the spikiness of the fibers out here, but that these feathers in here, they all kind of want to stick together. Now here's the hard and fast rule. When it comes to feathers, you really don't want to have more than 25% of webbing in the feather itself. Okay, so that's something that you want to look for. And this feather's the same way. It's a little more difficult to see, but you can see that line right through here. And again, you want to take a look at the feather itself and ask yourself, okay, how much webbing do I have in there? Now these fibers out here would probably be okay, but you know, you've got about 40–50% webbing in those fibers. That would not be the first feather I would pick for a dry fly. Now, one other aspect I want to tell you about. You can go to a fly fishing store and you can actually buy pre-packaged hackles for a dry fly, and by gosh, if they don't even put in the actual size of the hook that they go on to. can I tell you why that's not such a great idea? It does nothing to teach you about the materials. Um, it's just far too convenient. You go and you buy a full cape, and now you've got to get in there. You've got to know a little bit about which feather to use. You got to know a little bit about the guard feathers out here, and you also have to be able to pick out the correct size of feathers. And it teaches you about the materials you're using. So my first thought is to refrain from buying those pre-packaged feathers. It's just it's too easy. And this is a much better learning experience, and also I believe it's more economical too. So just something to think about, keep in mind. Okay, let's prepare this feather for putting the tail on. So as you can see here, we've got a line of webbing that extends right through here. So this right here is about the 25% mark. The rest of this I am not going to use. So the first thing I'm going to do to prepare this feather is just to get all that out of there. Makes the feather look a lot less confusing. Just pluck it out of there and away with it. Now what I want to do here, grab these fibers, just extend them straight out from the stalk like so, from the stem I should say. Get them all together so that they're extending straight out, and what you're doing is you're evening up the length here. So right about there, they're all even. Now here's the important part. Grab the actual fibers themselves, kind of stretch them here, and now at this point remove the feather away from the fibers. That way you haven't changed the length of the feathers. They're still sitting there tightly pinched in your hand, and that when you go to gather these, they will all be the exact same length. And that'll make for a very nice, neat fly. Alright, let's put it on the hook. Alright, now you've noticed that I've wrapped towards the tail set. I've angled my my hook a little bit so that we can see this a little bit better. Now what I'm going to do is to grab those fibers that I've already torn off the previous feather there and just kind of put them in place. And what I'm going to try to do is guesstimate 2 to 2.5 times that hook gap in there. Now for feathers, you're going to be 2 to 2.5 times the hook gap. If you happen to be using hair as a tail, such as in like a humpy, then the length is only going to be about 1 to 1.5, because that hair is a lot stiffer. You don't need to have the length in the back of the hook that you do with a feather. So I'm going to guesstimate here about 2 times, right about there. Then what I can do here is to transfer it over to my other hand, make it even with the hook here, and then put my duckbill pinch into use. Bring it around, and then down onto the hook. Make a couple of wraps forward, and then let's take a look and see where we're at. And I think that's probably about right. Alright, now what I'm going to do here is wrap forward, securing these fibers in a little bit more, and also I'm going to maintain that tapered effect here on the body. Then what I can do here is to come under with my scissors and pretty much get all of them at the same time. A couple of stragglers in there. And then what we'll do is just secure those down. And we're not done yet here. I like when I'm tying to give you guys the point of view perspective here, so you'll have to kind of bear with me as I'm doing this because the camera is right in front of me. I've noticed that other people tie opposite. They keep the camera opposite of them when they're tying, but the problem is it kind of turns you around, and I think it's a little bit easier to do this when you have the same perspective as the tire does. Now what I'm going to do is going to wrap back to my initial tail set. So right about there. Now you can see I've got kind of a droopy, sad tail. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to invert my bobbin, and then I'm going to take a wrap right underneath the tail here, right through here, between the tail and the hook. What that's going to do is two things at once. One is going to prop the tail up. And if you look at mayfly, those tails, they come up, they curve up away from the body. And the other thing that they do, if you notice how I'm separating those fibers a little bit, and that's because the tail of a mayfly, as it comes off the body, they separate as well. They get wider. So we're going to do two things at once here. So I'm going to come around, invert my bobbin, pull my tail fibers up, come underneath them, give it a wrap from underneath, and then what I'm going to do is it's going to prop that tail up, and it's also going to separate those fibers. You can see now that they're separated. The tail is much higher, and I can pull down and really separate those. And then just take one wrap forward and lock all of those into place. So now my tail is about to here, so it's about two and a quarter, the hook gap. The tail is coming up away from the body, and at the same time it's separating, which is exactly what the mayfly does, and that is a proper way to set the tail in place. And if you'll notice, there isn't a gargantuan amount of materials back here. You don't need that. And if you look at the tail of a mayfly, there's really usually only three fibers, tail fibers back there. So there you have it. That is your tail.